Welcome back, everybody, to the Flight Path podcast. We are so excited that you're here. As always, this is the best place for all of your Tern news, updates, best practices. I'm one of your three hosts, David, CEO and co-founder here at Tern, joined as always by Brad, our head of design, Molly, our head of product, and we have a action-packed show for you today. We're going to be talking about a bunch of updates that we shipped, major improvements to forms, updates to email deliverability, new labels, and a whole bunch of other stuff. We're also going to be diving into a thread that has kind of blown up in the Facebook group. So going to be a great show, going to be a lot of good conversation, a lot of good learnings. Before we move on to the kind of weekly check-in, just a reminder that this is, we think, the best way to learn about all things Tern. And if you're running your business on Tern, then this is a great podcast to subscribe to. So go ahead and click on that subscribe button on whatever platform you are listening, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We're on all of them. So we'd love to see you there, and leave the comments. We do read all of those. With the intro out of the way, how are we doing this week? Brad, how are you feeling today? How are things?
I'm feeling all right. It's been a whirlwind of a week, David, and I have so much respect for your ability to constantly travel and still be alive. Like we'll talk about, right? We were in Detroit for the first half of this week for like our on-site, busy all day, which I can imagine is a lot like when you're at a conference. And then today I'm flying out to Arizona to go see my partner sister and run like a half marathon with them this weekend. And I'm exhausted already. I don't know how I'm going to muster the energy for a half tomorrow, but we're going to make it work.
I was gonna say, like, that's like, extra hard, right? Like, not only are you doing all the travel, but then you add a half marathon on top of it. I think that's harder than usually. I just like veg on the couch on the weekend, but that's props to you. That's gonna be really fun. We've got a lot of people racing. Brian's like doing a relay in Asheville. Like, this apparently is a big race weekend. So you'll have to check in and see how the half went. But that sounds really fun. Molly, how are you doing? How's your week been?
Yeah, I'm exhausted and I'm pretty fired up too of just like we had a really wonderful offsite and talked about all the things we want to accomplish over the next few months and few years, and it was just, yeah, it fired me up. I just want to do them all tomorrow. So that was really exciting, and we'll talk about it. I'm also feeling kind of very like reflective and thoughtful. We've gotten some feedback this week that we're going to dig into, and just figuring out how to address that in the best way possible. So a lot of good stuff to cover.
It's gonna be good, and I'll echo both of that. It was, we for some context, I think we alluded to this last week in the podcast, but like, we brought the kind of full sort of extended leadership team, so the leadership team, tech leads, all together into Detroit, and sort of took 2.5 days to just sort of zoom out and say, what is our plan for 2025, 2026, 2027? And I'll echo what both Brad and Molly said. It's like, still exhausted, but like, just so confident that the best is yet to come. 2025, I think, is going to be Tern's best year, and then 2026 is going to be an even bigger year. And it's just really, really cool, the ambition that we have. And we'll talk more about that, I think, at the end of the podcast. But a lot of really big things, and I think one of the values that we really kind of, I think, like, solidified or hardened or maybe recommitted to is like this idea that we are not just trying to build another software platform. Like, we are trying to kind of fundamentally rethink this industry around the travel advisor. I think for too long, like, so many layers in the stack have just sort of said, well, like, oh, the travel advisor will just like do the extra manual data entry. They'll just do the work, or like they'll trace down their commissions if they're not getting paid it, right? There's like so many things where it's just been like, well, like, we'll just make the advisor, figure that out. And that's where this invisible work comes from. And it's not out of bad intent, right? It's just like, that's the systems that have existed, and that's sort of been like the only pathway. And as we think about really restructuring this industry around the advisor with new technology in a way that empowers advisors and agencies, it's really, truly exciting. So it'll be fun to kind of continue to bring that to life on this podcast over the next many months and years. But we've made some good progress even this week in terms of like how we've listened to feedback, improvements we've made to the kind of product. So I think we're going to kick off and talk about what a lot of people have been waiting for. We talk about forms like on the podcast for the past couple of weeks, and people have been like, well, there's this one thing that I'm like really waiting for. And Brad, it's shipped, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Of course, yeah. And we've talked about this as how we've I think described it in the product update, is like optional form responder on forms. And you might be like, what is a form response? Like, what does that even mean? In our feedback tool, I think the post that actually asked for this was more like, make it so my clients don't have to enter the same information twice. And that might make it more clear, like what exactly we're talking about. But I will share my screen so we can have a visual for folks who are watching as well as listening. So on forms, up until this point, we've always had kind of a first page, no matter what type of form it would be. There was a first page that asked for details about who's actually filling out the form. And this was really important for us because we wanted to make sure that anyway we're showing a form response today, we could show you exactly who filled that out. And kind of the initial way to do that was to have this one element on every form where you filled out that information. Well, what we realized over time is often you have responder information like their name, email, phone number, etc. And then you actually want to collect that same information on the contact who you're trying to create or update with the form, or the travelers who are actually requesting a trip or filling out the group sign-up form. And so that became duplicative, where it's like, oh, they're filling that out. Everyone's filling it out on page one. And then even though we try to like pre-fill it on the next page or next couple of pages, it just still felt like, oh, they are encountering the same input twice. Like it just feels like more work than it needs to. So we worked really closely with the engineering team basically to be smarter about this, where if you're already collecting traveler details or collecting contact details and you don't have like a responder element in here now, we just assume that the contact you're filling it out for or the first traveler is the responder to the form. And so that way, if that's kind of like the main case you're expecting with your forms, you can just remove that element and have a really streamlined, now you can actually have a single one-page form in Tern, which you couldn't have before. So I'll just show quick here. This is a form today in Tern, and this is one that was created before we made this change. So you can see here that there's page one with responder details. So if you had a form that existed before we made this change, this will be what your form looks like as well. And if you don't want that responder there anymore, if you would rather just have the like basic contact details be the only thing they fill out, you can remove that by just going here, hitting delete question, and then you can delete this page entirely. And then when you go to preview the form, it'll just land you right on page one. And this is what your clients will see when they log in, instead of what they previously would have seen, which is this just basic, like who's filling out this form question. So that's it. I know it sounds really simple. It's actually, we're like removing features almost, but it's actually providing more flexibility and doing it in a smart way so that you're not losing that information or all the places where we show the responder today in Tern. Molly, anything to add there?
And maybe like Molly, I'll kind of like tee up a question for you too, because Brad, you sort of mentioned this, right? Like it sounds like there's maybe some best practices for like when you would want a responder element versus when you wouldn't. Like any kind of guidance or like kind of level of detail that we'd want to share for people there, and just like how to think about that.
Well, you teed me up perfectly because that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, it's so funny because like we got so much feedback around making this optional that I was almost like, no one's ever going to use the responder ever again because people hate it so much. And actually, like we saw recently, 2/3 of new forms are still using responder, so that there is a reason to do it. It's just that flexibility and not having to have like a multi-page form was so important to people. So very happy that we have it. So a use case, just as one specific example, if you want to optimize for something like an assistant or someone not traveling on the trip, filling out a form and collecting like their contact information separately from the traveler information, that's a perfect use case to kind of keep the responder in there. The other thing to note is if you keep the responder on a separate page from traveler details or basic contact information, as Brad mentioned, we will still do that smart pre-fill. So just to kind of bring this to life a little bit, if you have the responder on page one and traveler details on page two, for that assistant who's not going on the trip, they can say, I'm not going on this trip. I'm filling out this form for someone else, essentially. And we won't pre-fill their information. They can then fill out their boss's information and any other information, and they're all set. if they are going on the trip and they don't check that box, we will pre-fill that information and they're also all set. So that's kind of the default way that it used to work. And I think that will still work for a lot of people. But other folks, and we even see how nice it looks just on a single page, nice and streamlined. If you don't want to optimize for that use case, or maybe in the contact information form, you're like, they're filling out a contact information form, it's probably them just as one, like it might just be nicer to have it on a single page without the responder. So that's maybe a little bit of how to think about it when it makes sense and when it doesn't.
Love that. And I think it's like so cool because that was going to be the other question. Like, Brad just sort of demoed it here, right? Like you can remove the responder, you can drag it back out. It's now kind of at the bottom of the form elements list, and really compounds with the other updates we've made. If you do a trip request form, you can now bring in the kind of the contact information. And I think this is, we've talked about this before, right? But like a lot of this stuff is like actually technically more complex than it may seem. And it's because we didn't want to just build, a simple custom form builder where you could like do all these things. We want it to understand if you add the birthday here, whose birthday should we be updating in your CRM? Right. And like that actually, as like humans, it's like easy for us to think about like, oh, well, like in this case, you're updating the responder, but in this case, you're actually updating the traveler. Like, actually, that's all logic that has to be programmed behind the scenes. And it can be, there's so many different permutations because you could have a responder, you could not have a responder, you could have travelers, you could not have travelers. Like there's so much flexibility that kind of behind the scenes creates a lot of complexity. So this is why like we didn't build it, to begin with, because we knew, that we knew that it added a tremendous amount of complexity. We wanted to see how big of a deal it was. And then, we heard pretty clearly it's like a very, big deal. We kind of felt the pain. We saw how it was working. We dug into the data. And, now I think the form product has really made a massive leap forward between, being able to customize the trip request form to include all the CRM being able to like change the responder, have a single page form, multi-page form, optimize for assistance or not optimize for assistance. It's like really been pretty neat to watch the form product mature dramatically over the past month or so. So very excited about that. Anything else, Brad, you want to add on forms before we kind of move on to the other kind of updates?
We're not done. There's some more little UI things happening next week that I think, again, will just make this feel a little more polished on the page. I'm not going to preview them. We'll just talk about them next week. Come back and learn more.
We'll see you. So click that subscribe button, right? Then you'll get notified every Friday when we push this. It's like a great tee up there to sneak in the subscribe. So one of the other things that we've kind of been working on, and this is like very much a behind the scenes change, but we hope it makes a big difference, was just around kind of how we send email and sort of the implications for that. Molly, do you want to kind of take that away?
Yeah. So for those of you tuning in who don't know, Tern has kind of a unique approach to email that I think is actually quite common in world-class CRMs outside of the travel industry, like your, HubSpots, for example, where we directly integrate into client email. And what that means is that when you send an email from Tern and you've set up our email integration, which takes like a minute, it actually comes from your email client. So literally, if you go into your email client, like Gmail or Outlook, and go to the sent box, if you've sent that email in Tern, you'll see it in your sent box there. That's pretty special. We also can then sync in all of your emails automatically without the weird like BCCing or forwarding specific emails. So there's a lot of good stuff there. We don't have time to go into that all today. But what that also means is we have best in class deliverability, because again, we're not sending it from some like weird shadow type system in Tern. It's literally coming from your email. But what we found was that depending on the email client provider, they could have some specific kind of metrics for making things seem like higher spam rate or like deliverability issues, depending on kind of the rate that we're sending emails from Tern. And so if you're already sending a lot of emails and you're like kind of close to that spam threshold in your email provider, it could like bump you almost like a little bit over the edge. I'm not sure if I'm describing this well. I'll pass it over to David and Brad to try to restate this. But anyways, the kind of like takeaway for people listening is that we've introduced some methods on our side to kind of delay some of the rate of sending to make sure that you're not going over that threshold, essentially. So I think most people have not encountered deliverability issues at all in Tern, but like for those who have, this should help.
And the kind of unlock, I think, was like you started looking at like, okay, who are the people that were like, hey, this is actually getting like flagged as spam more often, and there's the people that were doing like high volumes of trips, right?
Yes.
And we're like, well, that's kind of interesting. And we started to look at, and almost all those trips had automations on them, right? Where there's like one or many emails per trip going out. And so you can imagine like you're a email provider and you're looking what's a common spam behavior, right? Because like these emails can get caught really quickly. And so the spam behavior is like, I want to like blast a million emails really quickly, and I want to like get them in people's inboxes before I get flagged as spam, right? And so if you think about like what some of these automations would do, it'd be like, okay, like 180 days before the trip, every single one of these 200 subtrips is now getting emailed at the exact same millisecond. That's what we're like, oh, like, yeah, that actually like probably looks to the outside world as like a potential spam behavior. And so just by introducing some of this noise, right, we're not talking about like 50-minute differences, but like just by introducing noise where it sort of looks more like a standard kind of like send behavior, yeah, we think that will make a big difference in the rate.
It's sometimes when you talk about something and you can just tell that you're being confusing. So I appreciate that.
I didn't think it was confusing, just like it's a different way, right, to talk about it. And so again, this is something where like you just learn over time, right? That's like, oh yeah, like if you have people have hundreds of trips, thousands of emails could be going out, right? Like, and flagging that. So again, like people are like, yeah, so I think that'll help. Brad, anything you want to add there?
I was going to say the same thing. Nailed it.
Perfect. So we're all in sync today, I feel like, just like really teeing each other up nicely, kind of all
Spent a bunch of time in person, just like talking to each other every day for a while.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny how that happens. All right, we're going to get to this usability thread here in a second. But Brad, speaking of kind of usability and just like kind of helpful updates, there's one more thing we want to talk about on kind of trip labeling before we get into that.
And trip labeling is like what labels tags. Really what we're saying is now once we introduce groups into Tern, we have kind of like different trip types in Tern that each function a little bit differently. You have like group trips, you have what we call regular trips, which basically just means it's not associated with the group. Then you have subtrips, which means it's kind of like a trip within a group. And what we found folks doing accidentally was when they were trying to just delete a subtrip of a group, they accidentally delete the whole group, and it causes some real problems. And so we've more explicitly labeled on the overview page for each trip what type of trip it is. And also when you go to take an action on the trip, like duplicate it or delete it, things like that, we explicitly call out not just delete trip, but it's like delete group trip. Like this is the whole thing you're getting rid of. So that's really it. It's like pretty small change, but now you can just see there, and it'll be much easier, especially if you're trying to debug something. You're like, oh, why am I not seeing the thing I'm looking for? It might be more obvious to you now, like, oh, because I'm on the subtrip. Like, of course I should go look at the group. Someone on our support team, Brooklyn, was saying just even trying to talk to different advisors about this. She's like, well, it's a group trip because it's a group trip. Like there was no way to like show them in the UI. There's a great meme about like, you can tell it is by the way that it is or something. We're getting past that. We've made it more clear.
We made it more clear. Love that. Which is maybe a good segue into kind of where we're going to spend some time. Again, we're kind of, I'll maybe like sort of just tell the story of the week to kind of tee this up, right? So we spent Monday as a leadership team kind of revisiting the values that we wrote 2 years ago, and kind of checking in, being like, how are we actually living these? And it was overall like really special to see how the company, which was maybe 6 people at the time, now it's like much larger, like is kind of stayed true to those values. And Molly, I think one of the things you really talked about on Monday was just this like avoiding the culture of bad news not being okay, right? Like, and people, I think we've all like worked in different environments, right, where like leaders and different people in the company don't want to hear bad news, right? And so like it's never necessarily like an explicit thing, but it's like sort of the way that people respond to it, the way that they react to it, like sort of sets the tone of like, don't bring me bad news. So it's like that conversation is like fresh in our head, and kind of coming back on Monday, we did a nice team dinner. I'm like literally in bed, and I'm like, well, like I know this is bad. I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm like, I'll just check the Facebook group really quickly. And right away there's this like giant image of like a frustrated user like right there being like basically kind of bring to life like I think Tern is really difficult to use, like I think it's really hard to like set up all these automations, like and kind of going into this, and it was just like boom, like instant cortisol hit, like adrenaline's pumping. I'm like reading through the comments, and we'll talk about some of those, but it was like it was tough to read, right? But it's like, and there's part of you that's like you want to sort of like not feel that way, right? And so you're just like there's bad habits that like immediately go in your head, like should we just like delete the thread? And it's like nope, like we gotta like lean in here, right? And like really understand it, because if a user is feeling strong enough about this to like share this with the community out of like desperation, then like it's on us to figure that out. um some of the comments definitely felt a little bit like mean tweets. So that was that was tough. But I think that there's a lot of things that we like learned. A lot of this was already a roadmap. We've talked on this podcast, right, about how like we want to really continue to make Tern more usable over the past several weeks, right? So like it's not a surprise to us that there's room for improvement here. And when you filter through kind of some of the less constructive comments, there's actually a lot of really good feedback. And so excited to kind of talk about how we're thinking about that. And I'll hand it over to Brad and Molly to kind of talk about that. The last thing I'll say here is the thing that's like always, I think, most triggering for me is when I see something where it's like, well, like, if everything's not perfect, then Tern should be in beta and they should, it should be much cheaper, right? Or like, there's this sort of perception, right, that like Tern's in beta or it's not done. And that's always triggering for me. It's always tough because like we will never be done. Right. And like candidly, like I don't think any advisor should ever buy a platform that's like this is done and it is perfect. Because as soon as you have that mentality that something is perfect, like why improve it? Right? Like why get better? Why listen to feedback? Right. And so we have this mentality at Tern, and I think probably both Brad and Molly will kind of talk about this, where it's like, we're never done. And we would rather ship something like forms, see how people actually use it, get that value out there. There's been like multiple millions of form submissions, right? The product is working. The product is creating value for people. Is it perfect? No. And so like over the past month and a half, like we've been investing in leveling that up. Is it going to be perfect after we finish this project? No, we'll probably do another forms project in the future, right? That doesn't mean forms is a beta product. It means that we have this constant desire to get better and to move things forward. And we apply that to every part of the product. And so I always just kind of push back on that. And we also think that like Tern is just tremendous value, right? If you think about this. And so like, is it perfect? Absolutely not. We're going to talk about all the things that we're really excited about. The similar CRMs out there are in the hundreds of dollars a month, right? Where it's like $49 a month for like great service. So anyway, let's switch from like what happened to like what's resonating here, and like what are we doing about it, right? Because I think this is like what I thought was so cool is after I got over the initial split second, like should we just delete this and pretend it never happened, which is a terrible instinct. We like leaned in and we're like, let's actually like let's engage, like let's ask for more information, let's figure it out, let's prioritize. And so maybe Mal, I'll hand it over to you just to kind of talk about when you saw this bright and early on Tuesday or whenever it was, right? Like what was kind of your reaction, and kind of what was the process you went through?
Yeah, I mean, I got kind of excited. I know that's probably like not the talk about like bad reactions or like non-intuitive reactions. Like I actually got excited and I was like, we need to hire 50 engineers tomorrow and just fix every single thing. Not going to do that. But because I think we've heard this type of feedback where it's like Tern can just feel a little bit overwhelming or hard to get started on. And like, how cool is it that we have this many users like taking the time to write out this detailed feedback and get on calls with us and make us understand the problem? Like I think someone in the thread mentioned like, oh, you need a travel advisor on your team to like do some of this. And like we actually do have Andrew, who's an engineer and a travel advisor, which is super cool. And he had so much unique value to everything that we plan. But I also just like don't think that's true just because of the goodwill of the community and how much people are willing to share with us. Like that's just some of the posts were hard to read, but it's like pretty special. I think it's a unique position to be in that people are willing to spend this much time with us and like really help us get it right. I went through every single post I think on 99% of them, I asked if people were willing to get on a call with Brad and myself to dig in more, because I think it gives us an initial direction, some of the Facebook content, but once you dig in and start to understand, okay, why are you asking for that? What's going wrong? Like, it helps us build it right? We're not going to just like blindly build every single thing that's asked for. We want to understand the trends and pain points and like the areas that are going wrong, and then take a step back and figure out what is the best possible way to go about addressing this. And there's nothing like digging in to people's workflows on calls to really to bring that to life. So that's what I spent a lot of my time over the past few days doing, is like just responding, setting up calls, and getting into that next level of detail on what people are asking for. And then, as David mentioned, we actually already had a large portion of our roadmap dedicated to some of these kind of usability improvements. And what I mean by that is like not building net new features, but rather going back to our existing features and making them better and simplifying and just making it easier to orient and use Tern, minimizing those clicks, all that good stuff. So I really then spent more time on our roadmap, just like honing what those areas will be based on the feedback we're getting. And that's not done. These calls will really inform some of that sequencing. I will say some of the areas around like making form responses easier to access where you need them, like off the contact and off the trip, stuff like that are feel like immediate wins based on what we heard. And also like library management and organization through a system like folders is another one that just stood out as like fairly straightforward for us to tackle and just so important to so many people. So yeah, a lot of really good stuff. And I think, yeah, just kind of feeling thankful and motivated to really start to tackle some of these big areas. Brad, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, trying not to repeat both what you've already said, like the just that like, but also like, you know, being really grateful to have all of the feedback constantly. I think like just reflecting on kind of like how we got here, I guess a little bit. Like I'm personally excited. I'm like excited that we're hearing more just feedback like this, because I think when we started building Tern, there's like a specific set of users who are giving us feedback, and they represent a population within the advisor community where it's like actually we were kind of building for them, for a smaller segment, where the decisions we made back then like actually worked pretty well based on like what they were looking for and asking for. And what we found over time is, of course, like the advisor community is incredibly diverse. Your workflows are very diverse. The clients you're building for, the types of trips, like, or like even the way you think about managing your business is very diverse. And so over time, we've been like layering on more flexibility, like more things that you can do in Tern to support your business. But what that's kind of resulted in is like, ooh, now there's like a million different things I can use Tern for and a million ways I can do it, but it doesn't really feel optimized for my business, like my specific case. And so I think it's been really cool to be able to zoom out and say like, okay, let's actually better let's get super clear, like what are the differences between the types of trips you're planning, the businesses that are using Tern, and how do we better optimize for some of those specifics for the actual like workflow you're trying to pull off, instead of like the features that you need on the page where it's like, I need to be able to have this information in Tern. Like we get that. How often? When do you need that? Like, do you need it every time you log in? Is it like only if you're doing a certain workflow? Like there's lots of questions like that we like didn't have a lot of input on early on, because it's like a few users pop up and they're like, hey, we need this thing. We're like, cool, we'll add it the way it works for you. And now when you have more users who are like, I also want to use that, but it actually doesn't, that's not the way I think about it. Like, can you do it better for me? And so it's really cool that we have that kind of like expanding audience, where now it's harder for us, of course, to go back and say, how do we make it work really well for everyone? But it's a really cool challenge. And I think, again, just like super grateful that people are willing to spend time with us to help us expand our understanding of those workflows and the way, you know, that all these things work across the industry.
Yeah. The other way I put this is like, over time, you kind of see the heat map of feedback, because we always get feedback, always, right? And we will always continue to get feedback. But the heat map of it kind of shifted from, you're missing these 50 features that like I literally can't use you for until you have these 50 features, to now it's like, you have the features for the most part. There'll always be missing features, but like they don't quite work how this specific use case needs them to, right? So like it's kind of cool actually. It's like we're in almost a new, I won't say era, I will say era. Well, new phase. And it's just an inside joke because one of our teammates, Ellen, is obsessed with Taylor Swift and eras. So I don't like to encourage her to talk about that, but I don't know. Am I going to get it?
Talk about brand, like when a word like era is just now like universally linked to a musician, right?
And
like you can't even use it.
The Swiftie passion, like I probably shouldn't have mentioned anything.
That'll blow up in the comments.
Negative. Yeah, no. I actually do like her music. Anyways, I'm getting way off track. It's been a bit of a week, people. But no, it's cool to go into this like new phase where we still, of course, will be building new features like invoicing, but a lot of our time will go into kind of improving the existing product, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and I think it'll just be a really unique challenge too on the design side to like not disrupt people's current workflows, like people who have adapted to Tern and like think about like, well, I've optimized for the way Tern works today, and we come in and say, oh, we've got all this feedback, we're changing how Tern works. Like we want to do that in a way where like ideally it doesn't feel like a burden for folks who really like dialed it in with the current user experience and the way the current UI is structured to like have to go back and relearn. So like if I think about like what makes me most anxious about this work, it's not so much like the feedback, it's more like the how do we act on that in a way again that like makes it better without like kind of alienating people who actually love the way it works today. So it'll be a unique challenge.
And sorry, I have one more thing to say. I feel like we could talk about this for hours, but I think it's also like if you are an existing user who already loves Tern, it's going to be really exciting for you too, because a lot of the things that we're zeroing in on that will most improve the existing product are things that we hear from our existing users, like a folder for library management, like more of a view across your trips. Like I think it's cool because the Venn diagram, it's like it's not like, oh, we're only gonna like improve the user experience of an existing feature and not add anything else to it. It's like plugging a lot of those functionality gaps versus like net new surface area of features, if that makes sense. So there's a lot to be excited about no matter who you are in terms of this roadmap.
And like I think a lot of what we're seeing like on the new user side, right, it's like the defaults and the configuration and content right that's there, and like how do you learn this new system. But to your point, Molly, it's also we have this breadth of features that we've built over the past 2 years, but like it's not always easy to understand like, okay, if I'm planning 30 trips, like what payments do I have due in the next couple of weeks, right? Yeah. Like okay, like I've got all these tasks, like which ones are like most urgent in kind of the broader context of my business, right? And so like starting to think through like what's that next layer on top, the kind of connective tissue between these things. Like we always talk about like flows over features, and I think our features flow together fairly well, but there's not actually a lot that sits at that top level to give you the like business level bird's eye view, or like really answering that question of like, I'm logging in at 8 a.m. or whatever it is. What do I need to do right now? Right. And like, how do I do that really quickly and really effectively? So really excited about that. I'll say 2 more points here and then we can kind of like close out this section. But one thing, Molly, you mentioned this also as you were kind of talking about it. And Brad, you said something I think that really solidifies this point, which is, people a lot of times ask, or they say like, oh, do you have travel advisors on your team? Like, do you have to hire a travel advisor? Right. And then Brad, you were talking about like all the different use cases, right? Every travel business is different. And so like Andrew, like you call that, Molly, is like fantastic. And I'm like, it's really cool to have that perspective on the team. But I think actually by making the assertion that you should hire a travel advisor, it sort of means that like it can become a crutch, right? We're just like, oh, like, well, we have a travel advisor on the team. Like they'll just tell us how to build this. And actually like that's one perspective, that's one business model, that's like one viewpoint. And, even when Andrew was joining, I remember like we were having conversations and it was like, well, this is how I do it. It's like, oh, that is probably how 30% of the advisors that use Tern do it, but there's actually 70% that do it very differently, right? And so there's this blind spot that can come when you over rotate on having a person on the team with expertise. And I think that is what's so powerful about this approach that Brad and Molly just mentioned, which is like, we lean in with everybody. And we take this massive point cloud of conversations and nuance and feedback and canny requests. And we're like, okay, tremendous amounts of data. Like, what are the right things? Like, how do we build this in a way that actually works for the most people? What flexibility do we need to build in? And that is, I think that's why Tern will win. Candidly, I think that's our superpower, and I think we will continue to do that. And now we're sort of shifting the focus, if you will, from feature expansion to like, how do we just make this incredibly efficient? And then the last thing I'll share, because I think sometimes people like hearing a little bit of just like the business part of this, right? Like most of the people listening to this are business owners, right? So like I'll share this this kind of visual here if I can find it. It's very simple, but like in kind of software and in technology, there's this idea of the kind of technology adoption lifecycle. This was pioneered by a book called Crossing the Chasm, and it kind of talks about how a lot of technology startups are able to find the innovators, right? These are the people, many who listen to this podcast, right? You love adopting new technology. You're like, when Tern cold emailed you 2 years ago and like, hey, we're thinking about building something, like you responded and you're like, we want to set up time, right? That group is like very small, and they like thrive on, this is like 90% broken, but I can like see where it's going to be in 2 years. And then you start to get to this like chasm where it's like the early adopters, like they want it to kind of be working, but it doesn't have to be perfect, right? And like they understand there's gonna be like bugs, and they're like excited about that, and then crossing over to like the early majority, which is like most people, and if you listen to this might be you, right? You're not excited about like a half-baked, like sort of not working platform, right? Where it's missing 90% of the features you need. But like once it starts to get to maturity, like you're excited about like, how can this help move my business forward? And I think what's really interesting, especially as we, Tern gets bigger, as we have more, kind of brand recognition, as more people are talking about it, right? Like different parts of this adoption lifecycle are starting to come in. And where this really happens is when like an agency switches. Because when an agency switches, like you may have an agency owner that's more on the left side of this chart. And then you may have, like I was talking to an agency owner asked to River Cruise, you may have like, they have a 93-year-old travel advisor who still has filing cabinets. And you ask that 93-year-old travel advisor to like move on to Tern, like that is a big leap that requires a fundamentally different user experience than what maybe we were building for kind of on the left side of this chart, right? So I think it's like really fun from like a business perspective to actually see like we have crossed the chasm here. And now it's like really starting to think through like, what's this next level of the business? Like, how are we really starting to think through like, how do we make Tern just as easy and powerful for that 93-year-old travel advisor who's like, I'm going to be doing this until I die, to like the person who's like just starting their career. They love technology. They're super innovative. Like they want to like be able to use this. Both of those personas need to be able to come in and find tremendous value from Tern very quickly. And that is a privilege and a cool place to be as a kind of tech platform, that we are like in that position, and that we have, I'll echo this, like we have this user base and this community that like cares so much, right? Like those posts are hard to read, but you would not make that post. You would not comment on that thread if you didn't care, right? And like, that's really special that we have 125 people who took time out of their day to comment on that post. And like, that is really, really cool. And my commitment and Brad's commitment and Molly's commitment is like, we are going to listen, and like, we are going to make this so much better.
I would say we're going to continue to listen, right? Like, it's not like we're starting to listen.
That's true.
This has always been in our DNA. And like, I think it just becomes even more and more important, especially as new people come in and they don't have that relationship with us where they've seen us continue to listen, like just continue to deliver.
Yeah. And the only other thing I would say is like that curve of like late majority, I actually don't think it equates to tech savviness, like as a rule, where we even saw in that post, it was like, I'm a tech nerd. I do tech as my day job. And like, I am like a closet late majority. Like I actually don't like adopting 50 new technologies. I generally have like a workflow I like to do, and I don't want to use something unless it like truly fits all my needs. So I am like a tech savvy late adopter type of persona. And so I think we're just hearing more of that persona now, as David was talking to. And that doesn't have to mean you're using filing cabinets. That can mean you're a very tech savvy person, but you're just not necessarily the type that's like, that kind of early adopter. So I know that makes you think less of me because he's like the early adopter that you can get to, but
it's so true. I mean, I think that's what's cool, right? It's like we, even within the kind of tech space, you've got these kind of different tastes and personas and preferences, and like that is reality. And I think that's really exciting. And like, it's our job as technologists to figure out like, how do we make sure that we support that, right? And like be thoughtful about that and like communicate where we're at today. So we're running quite a bit over here. I think like moving on maybe to the last thing, like we talked about this leadership offsite, I think that the thing I want to leave people with is, you haven't seen anything yet is really where it's at. I mean, I think like we've got really big things planned for 2025 and 2026 and 2027. And like I said at the beginning, our ambition is not to just build a better widget. Like our ambition is to fundamentally empower travel businesses, advisors, and agencies in a way that technology has never done before. And we have the team to do it. I think that's the other thing I walked away from the leadership team offsite with, and just like watching not only how the leadership team getting together talking about this things like was really exciting, but watching how everybody that wasn't on site put the company on their back for the better part of a week, and things just continued to execute. Like product kept getting shipped. Like our support response time went down, right? Like in terms of like, and that's a good thing, right? It takes us less time to respond to somebody as our new support team ramps. Like just like watching the success side of things, like watching all these different functions, like really be able to continue to operate just like means the world in terms of the quality of the team that we have. And so we've got big things happening behind the scenes. Stay tuned. And like I said, our commitment to you is that we will listen every week. We will lean into the hard feedback. We'll also celebrate the wins, by the way. There was a lot of really cool Facebook posts that we didn't talk about like, oh my God, like port guides and city guides. And like, these things have changed my life. And like, here's a really cool thing that I did. And like, thank God Tern listened. Like we should actually probably talk about those on the podcast too. Cause like, check those out in the Facebook group also. Like they're, it's not just the bad stuff, but like we zoom in on the bad stuff because we want to have this culture of like, not shying away from bad news, not like leaning away from the sting, because when you lean away from the sting, you miss the signal. And so that's our commitment to all of you. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep building. We're going to keep executing. We're going to keep changing this industry. So Brad, Molly, any closing thoughts before we wrap?
Oh, just when you lean away from the sting, you lose the signal. I think it's a thing now.
I have never in my life heard that. I don't know if you just invented it on the fly.
That was real-time improvisation right there. Yeah, no, I've never heard that either. I just made it up.
Number one value.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been another episode of Flight Path, your number one source for Tern news, updates, kind of behind the scenes look into building a business in this space. Go ahead and click that subscribe button, click that like button. We publish these every Friday afternoon. And let us know what you think in the comments. We appreciate your support. If you're listening to this, we are truly grateful for your partnership. And we'll see you in the next episode.